Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the video game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, the pre-original FPS, a sequel to an NES cult classic, and the last of a beat-em-up trilogy. I'm your host, Jared, and today is March 1st, 1994. A cult classic on the platform largely ignored because of new hardware already available, but still beloved by those who know it. And it just got a sequel. Released in March 1994 for the NES, was Zoda's Revenge, StarTropics II. Zoda's Revenge is an isometric adventure game. Once again, play as Mike, yo-yo, and baseball enthusiast as he tries to protect some aliens from an evil alien. Travel through time and explore a variety of locales from the Stone Age, the Wild West, and Victorian England. Along the way, talk to numerous NPCs, including several historical figures. Gameplay improvements over the original include being able to move in all 8 directions, and you can change direction mid-jump. Find power-ups like an axe, a sword, and heart containers that increase your maximum life. Get Mike as strong as possible so that he can face down against Zoda and all 3 of his clones. StarTropics II was developed and published by Nintendo. The first StarTropics game was made to intentionally appeal to Western audiences, which is why it has so many American things in it, like baseball and Mike Jones being from Americola. The original game was also never released in Japan. It was meant for American players. Zoda's Revenge was also only released in America. In fact, it never got a European release. There's a major plot point in the game in which you must collect several magical artifacts called tetrads. They were straight up Tetris pieces, which made sense since, at the time, Tetris was heavily associated with Nintendo thanks to the massive success of it on the Game Boy. In later re-releases though, the name tetrads was changed to blocks. The biggest promotion for Zoda's Revenge came from Nintendo Power, who provided 14 pages of coverage, essentially giving a walkthrough of the entire game, split across 2 issues. It was featured in both issue 57 and issue 58 as one of the last major releases the NES would get. But once again, Nintendo Power didn't actually provide a review for it. And even then, the other major outlets like EGM and GamePro magazine didn't even talk about it until months after its release. EGM finally gave a blurb in their June 1994 issue and reviewed it with an average score of a 6.4 out of 10. GamePro wouldn't review it until their July 1994 issue, where they did give it a 4 out of 5. Everyone felt it was an improvement over the original, but slightly lacking for a release at the end of the NES lifecycle. It was not a big seller. Most people didn't even realize it was a sequel to StarTropics since the box art prominently displays Zoda's Revenge instead of StarTropics II. If you want to play it again today, as of right now, it's only available to play again on the NES cartridge. When one of the most influential, biggest smash successes of all time releases, you get to quick work to port its precursor. Released in March 1994 for the Super Nintendo, was Wolfenstein 3D. Wolfenstein 3D is a first-person shooter. Play as BJ Blazkowicz as you shoot your way through the enemy stronghold. Find new guns to use and restore your health with medkits. You can also find all kinds of treasures to increase your score. Search for secrets on every wall and in every corner, and put a stop to the Stadtmeister's plans. The original Wolfenstein 3D was developed by id Software, laying the groundwork for their reputation in the first-person shooter genre. The SNES port was handled by Imagineer, who you may best know for publishing games like the PC versions of Lemmings or the Nintendo 64 game Quest 64. Obviously, it's based on the original DOS game Wolfenstein 3D. It is a port, but the SNES version did get a number of enhancements. A flamethrower and a rocket launcher was added. There's now an auto map that you can check. And now when you take damage, BJ's head at the bottom turns to face the direction that the shot came from. It's also the Super Nintendo version, which means it got a lot of censorship. One being the name change to the Stadtmeister, along with the removal of his 90s Michael Jordan mustache and his armband. All the dog enemies were changed to giant rats, and all German was removed for English-speaking bad guys. Of course, it was just a few months ago that the world was taken by storm by the explosive release of Doom. Because of this, the port of Wolfenstein 3D coming to console was largely ignored. Wolfenstein was already old and busted. Doom was the new hotness. People would rather have a home port of Doom. As such, Wolfenstein didn't get a whole lot of coverage or hype going into its release, especially since there weren't many new things to say about it. it did get a full-page magazine ad that ran for a few months. That's about it. Despite some hardware limitations, it still reviewed quite well. GamePro magazine said it was almost perfect, and Electronic Gaming Monthly was mostly positive, but did note that it certainly doesn't play as smooth as it does on a computer. Wolfenstein 3D on the Super Nintendo didn't sell a whole lot of copies and has gone on to be a surprisingly uncommon SNES game for collectors. If you want to play it now, the SNES version has never been ported, but the DOS original is playable pretty much everywhere, and it's even playable in most internet browsers. The third in a trilogy of games that most people didn't even realize were connected, released this week in 1994, was the Peace Keepers for the Super Nintendo. The Peace Keepers is a side-scrolling beat-em-up. Play as one of 4 playable characters as you go from left to right, beating the crap out of everyone that comes your way. Punch, kick, jump, grab, and throw every enemy you see. You can also enter a berserk mode for temporary hyper strength and unleash full-screen attacks. There's also branching paths as you play and 2 endings. Fight your way to the end, defeat the evil corporation, and of course, do it all in 2-player co-op. The Peacekeepers was developed and published by Jaleco. Despite not having any kind of branding connections, Peacekeepers is actually the third in a trilogy of beat-em-ups. The first was Rival Turf, part 2 was Brawl Brothers, and Peacekeepers is the third. They actually do share a story and some characters throughout, at least in the Japanese version. In Japan, the series is known as Rushing Beat, and in America, they decided on whatever the hell this cover art for Rival Turf is. Peacekeepers also has a feature not seen in many beat-em-ups. You can use a multi-tap for a 4-player mode. It's a 4-player versus mode, but still, that's cool. Like most Jaleco releases, it was a smaller title with not a lot of marketing. Reviews for the game were as divisive as you would expect when it comes to beat-em-ups. GamePro gave it a 4.2 out of 5, Nintendo Power gave it a 3.1 out of 5, and EGM had reviewers that liked it with an 8 out of 10, and one that only gave it a 4. The entire trilogy of games did get a re-release cartridge on the SNES from Retrobit, and Peacekeepers is currently on the Nintendo Switch SNES Online. Not only that, a 4th game in the Rushing Beat series called Rushing Beat X Return of the Brawl Brothers is set to release sometime this year. As for everything else, it's Editor X Return of the Dylan. Here's Editor Dylan.
No more retreading old ground. Here's all the games released this month that we already covered on different consoles. And I know we've covered pinball on this show a couple times, but we've never played real pinball for the 3DO. It's a completely virtual, entirely simulated, totally not real at all version of pinball. I feel like I was lied to. Should've called it fake pinball with ridiculously long load times. Anyone ready for a confirmed Game of the Year winner? According to Video Games Ultimate Magazine, Godzilla is the best Turbo Duo game of 1994. It's not much of a claim when you take into account the console had less releases than the NES this year, which has what, like 12? But it's actually a decent fighter that wasn't on the Neo Geo. And it's probably one of the best Godzilla games we'll see in North America for several years. But my absolute favorite part of this game by far is the stage clear screen. Okay? What? Seriously? What? Alright. I did not edit that. That's really what happens after every fight, and I laugh every time. I love when a new Game Gear release shows up because it's usually a game I had no idea existed. Who here has ever heard of CJ Elephant Fugitive? Follow-up question. Where are you from? Because anytime I see the name Codemasters, that usually means it got way more love in Europe. And if it never got a Genesis or SNES release, then chances are it's a port of an Amiga game. And if it's specifically on the Game Gear, that means there must be a Master System version somewhere in Brazil. After a quick search, I was pretty close. CJ's Elephant Antics is a platformer originally released for home computers in the late 80s, I think, maybe early 90s. He would eventually see an NES port lumped in with Dizzy and some of those Quattro compilations. I guess this is a sequel where CJ went too far with his antics and is on the run all across the world. There was a Master System prototype, but that never actually released. next. I don't have time to look further into it because Chester Cheetah Wild Wild Warrior released this week. Standard fare for licensed snack food platformers, but the basic premise is the beatnik Cheeto cat plans a road trip to Hip City, USA. Never heard of it, but according to Google Maps, it's a vegan restaurant on the East Coast. Interesting destination for a mascot whose main gimmick is to have a, quote, dangerous amount of cheese. As you might already know, Cheetos have cheese in them, which is a dairy product, so not vegan. What I didn't know is that the type of cheese they used isn't even vegetarian. Most of the big cheese flavored snack brands utilize a specific enzyme extracted from animals for, according to Frito-Lay, nutrients. Well, no wonder Chester loves them so much. Cheetahs are carnivores after all. 14 games released on these consoles this week in 1994.
Dude, do you remember Cheetos Paws?
Never had them, but they are all over the place in this game. Kinda makes me want to try them. Were they good?
Yeah, I remember having them and thinking they tasted just like normal Cheetos, but were harder to eat.
I'll take your word for it. Too bad they were discontinued. Update! Apparently, Paws are back. Or maybe they never left and I just thought they were discontinued. Either way, let's give them a try. And while I'm here, let's stock up on Dunkaroos, which also still exist. Alright. Imagine eating puffs, but with holes all over them, so they're even more nothing than those. They disintegrate in your mouth like cotton candy. I'll just stick with the crunchy.
Yeah, that's fair. I was always a Planters cheese balls kind of guy.
Dunkaroos are also a disappointment. But what if I combine the paws with the Dunkaroo frosting? Let's try it out. I'll do it on Patreon.
All right, thank you, Dylan. Here in the collector's corner, Zoda's Revenge was a budget title. It released with a price tag of $39.99. Now the cartridge alone is only worth $11. With the box and manual, the game is worth $50. Wolfenstein 3D is an obscure SNES game. A copy of it is going for a steady $42, and a complete one is a respectable $140. Peace Keepers is right there next to it. A cartridge of it is worth $52, and a complete one is $144. And that's it for today. Next week, a weird 90s fad turned video game, a Sega run and gun, and Capcom's final appearance on the NES. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I want to thank some patrons like Tom Perslin, Paul Anderson, and Sam Allen. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, especially if you played any of the games that we mentioned this week, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching this show every single Friday. I only recently played through StarTropics for the first time, and I have not played Zoda's Revenge. But also, anytime I'm out retro game shopping and I'm fingering through all the different NES games, I keep seeing this and think it says Zelda's Revenge, and I get really, really excited. And then I finally take it out and realize it's something completely different. I would play a game called Zelda's Revenge though.